On November 19, 2023, the Houthis hijacked a commercial ship in the Red Sea. They have since launched hundreds of missiles and drone attacks on commercial ships, which has effectively closed the Red Sea and the Suez Canal for commercial cargo. The economic fallout is now deepening, with wider ramifications. Shipping schedules have gone haywire as vessels now transit to the much longer Cape of Good Hope route to reach Europe from Asia. Containers are again in shortage as manufacturers scramble to secure a box, and ports like China, Shanghai-Ningbo, Singapore, and Jebel Ali in United Arab Emirates face serious congestion. On the other hand, the US economy is adding a strong pull on demand side, adding to the supply chain pressures. This supply-demand imbalance is coming just before the peak shipping season from July to September. Prices have almost tripled since the end of 2023. For many in this sector, it is a redux of the chaos that engulfed supply chains during the pandemic. So where are the supply chains headed?
Welcome everyone to this webinar where we will talk about the latest in the supply chains and where it is headed. I have with me today Bhavik Mota, Director, Head of Markets, Prahlad and Intra Africa IMEA Region, Prahlad Tanwar, Partner, KPMG, Rajkiran Kanagala, President and Chief Business Officer, TCI. Welcome everyone. And Bhavik, let me start with you first. What is your assessment of the global supply chain and where do you think it is at the moment?
Hi, good morning everyone. Thank you for getting me on this webinar. Thanks for inviting me. And yes, it's a very hot topic right now and a very valid question to start with. So what we are seeing right now on the global supply chain is, that since COVID, always the supply chain has been now on top of the agenda. But if you see the 2-3 years later, since now the COVID is over, I think cost reduction seems to have taken a center stage. That being said, I still feel that given the number of disruptions that we have witnessed in the last couple of years and also in the last 6 months, Red Sea being the latest, I don't think customers are undermining the need for a resilient supply chain. So point number one, what is still very relevant, irrespective of, the things evolving and changing, is the need for the resilient supply chain. Second, many companies are also diversifying their supply chains across the global region to reduce again the risk and increase their flexibility in terms of the cost and the lead time. So the another aspect which is taking or coming to the forefront is also how do you diversify the supply chain. And given that there is too much of volatility and uncertainty, what are three things that are really working right now is the need for all of us who are into logistics to be close to the customers, to understand their needs, being super agile in our operations because the disruptions are coming from the areas you would not expect or are kind of unprecedented. And last but not the least, the focus has to be on providing solutions, including alternative solutioning for them, which is becoming more important than ever. So yes, that's the world we are in right now. Very dynamic, very uncertain, very volatile, and the need of the hour is to be close to the customers and provide solutions that basically help them achieve their goals.
So Bhavik, it is very dynamic. Prahlad, coming to you, what is your assessment in supply chains?
Thanks, Pran, and good morning, everyone. From my perspective, decision-making and execution of supply chain functions is in a very vulnerable place right now. And I say that, keeping in context that there are two objectives of the supply chain function. One simply is to support maximization of profits, right, of the end business. And the other one is to minimize operational exceptions. And this is particularly from the perspective of manufacturing, not so much from, the supply chain service provider perspective, right? Because supply chains are built and institutionalized by manufacturing companies across the world. And they're always essentially trying to address these two objectives. And the reasons for the vulnerability, I'd like to, pin that down to 5 specific reasons, right? One is the overall regulatory and geopolitical measures that are playing out. And this includes both from a G2G perspective, but also from environmental perspective, right? So the new norms, the new policies, right, which are causing significant concerns, significant rework of how supply chains have existed historically. The second aspect is new infrastructure, right? And this is in the form of, if you look at shipping, you look at the new ports, you look at the new shipping alliances that are coming about. I think there's a lot to navigate for a manufacturer to kind of relook and reassess how their supply chains will work going forward. The third is new technologies and related cyber risks, right? And I think, they're both mutually exclusive as well as independent in a sense, because one is what we're finding is that the wider ecosystem is evolving at an inconsistent pace. So there are constantly new technologies that are being adopted by certain ecosystem stakeholders while others don't have access to it, right? The other issue is as more and more information moves to cloud, for example, we're going to have more and more issues around cyber, and we're already seeing various challenges, right? And this is both from a service provider perspective as well as a manufacturer perspective. I think the fourth and very interesting is going to be, changing client profile, right? So the way companies have thought about their supply chains, the way they want them to work today and in the future are going to be very different from how they've operated in the past. Different stakeholders in the supply chain are starting to get familiar with different processes. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be consistent across the various stakeholders. I'm talking about the service providers, I'm talking about the manufacturers, the customs in various countries. Within supply chains, multiple stakeholders, these could be sovereign regulators in the form of ports or independent shipping lines, freight forwarders, so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot of turmoil. And I think the fifth and very interesting is the real readiness of alternative supply sources. And I say this keeping in mind the fact that there's been quite a lot of narratives that have been put out about alternative supply sources, but we're not quite sure if the level of readiness and maturity of some of these sources. So in my opinion, I think supply chain thinking, planning, and execution has a very steep climb ahead. On the positive side, I think this will also create the opportunity supply chain service providers, and it should be interesting. Thank you.
Right. So dynamic, vulnerable, steep climbing. Raj, what are your assessment about supply chain?
Thanks. Thank you, Pran. Thank you to ET and hi to Prahlad and Bhavik. So one of the key aspect adding is sustainability and ESG. That's, I feel, is the biggest driver as far as when you look at a global supply chain, because case in the point is the European regulation which is coming up that by December 2024, it's linked to deforestation. That if you are quote unquote doing that, you can't export to Europe and you will have a penalty of 4% on your turnover in European Union. Now, when you have such regulatory frameworks coming up, you're obviously going to have more compliance issues as well as, of course, volatility and a cost impact. So that's something which we see. Second is the asset availability and asset purchase. While we are seeing it's global, it's becoming very complex to, for example, Maersk knows it better than anybody else to get across to a ship. Because what happened during the pandemic was that people ordered a lot of ships. The prices went up, but the prices are not cooling off, which means there's going to be more supply. There's a demand and supply mismatch, which we are now reading. But in Indian waters, if you see, and a linkage to global, we are not getting the ships. So the impact of a global supply chain is that you're not going to get enough ships to ply and reduce the cost overall, because the costs have gone up. That's one of the things. And the most important is the value versus cost proposition. Bhavik did mention we are always going to have a challenge between the value and the cost. So that's something which it's a debate which is perpetual. Finally, what I see from a brand side is that demand forecasting was always a challenge. There were these numbers that you were only up to 65% accurate level on the shelf side. I believe now it's going to be much, much tougher, irrespective of AI and ML coming into picture, because we were talking to a retail large player in India where they were importing a lot of raw materials to manufacture in India and sell it off across all the major cities, mini metros, every place. They said suddenly they had predicted in the eastern market, say 30,000 pieces of a particular type. That particular model or that particular garment sold nearly 100,000 pieces, and they suddenly were fell short big time. So they lost sales. Now the best of forecasting models could not predict. There was some peculiar reason which shot up the demand. Now, how do you address these issues? I believe these are the larger problems due to the impact of whatever we are saying, whether it is Red Sea, whether it is the war or anything else, is that demand forecasting has become much more complex. And if you talk to any supply chain head, that's the biggest challenge. And that's, of course, linked to cost. So they all get sort of intertwined in a way. So this is what we're seeing. And most importantly, on the contract side, Bhavik and Prahlad both mentioned, but what we see, people don't want to shift so easily because the cost of shifting is much more now because of the vagaries in the entire supply chain. So you would like to say bring down the cost with existing LSP or a WSP and see if that works. So as a first impact, what we are seeing is that people don't want to shift so easily, which hitherto was a done deal that every 2 years, 3 years, there was a shifting which was natural progression for any sourcing. So these are some changes, and the biggest thing is in Indian perspective, linkage to global supply chain investments are coming in. So you have Maersk, you have DP World, all the big boys trying to invest in the infrastructure side, and that's a good positive. And why this is happening? Because global supply chains are linking up to India. So if you look at the Indian perspective, these are all good things happening, helping overall the Indian ecosystem also. So these are a few points from what we believe as far as the global supply chain impact is concerned. Thank you.
Very interesting. Bhavik, coming to you, the impact of Red Sea being felt across the length and breadth of shipping, congestion, capacity seems to be the new challenges the sector is grappling with. How bad is the situation, and what will be the impact of a protracted closure of the Red Sea route?
Yeah, so I know this is the hottest topic right now. I think the situation in the Red Sea has escalated significantly in the recent months. Right, our initial estimate was it's a matter of couple of months when it started in December, but it has continued for longer than what it was expected. Uh, Top priority, of course, is always the safety of our crew, vessels, and the cargo on the ship. And as a result, you have to make some real difficult decisions, to kind of bypass the Suez or the Bubble Mandab Strait, as it's called, and reroute everything via the Cape of Good Hope. Right. Now, what we see, the risk zone has also expanded, with attacks now reaching almost offshore. So this has led to significant increase in the transit times, the cost, and also the vessels and the ships are forced to take longer routes to ensure the safety of the cargo and the crew. What we're also seeing is the ripple effect of the Red Sea is now quite widespread, leading to bottlenecks. And if you see industry wide, the capacity constraint as a result of recalibrating, redeploying the ships and all of that was 5 to 6% in Q1. And all the idle capacity around the world was used to kind of carry cargo where you had bottlenecks. Now those are already in play, so getting additional capacity is becoming a challenge, and that's what's leading to bottlenecks across the world. With the demand also ramping up, we are seeing vessel bunching, we are seeing massive delays and congestions, and also shortage of equipment across the world. So we anticipate that substantial capacity loss industry wide and in the range of 15 to 20%, and mostly felt from Far East to North Europe, and the Mediterranean market. So that's where we have seen a massive shift, a combination of a perfect storm, if you want to call it, where demand is going up and the capacity is further constrained compared to what we saw initially. Of course, despite of all of these challenges, we are trying to implement all the measures to enhance the reliability. This also includes you have to sail the ships at faster speeds, increase capacity where we are seeing massive crunch to the extent possible. All this, in addition to longer sailing, means the operation costs have gone up significantly, and the capacity is even tighter in the market. Unfortunately, the combined effect and results of all this means there are surcharges over and above the freight rates, which means the cost for customer is also going up. We are burning a lot more fuel. As a percentage, is 40% more fuel is getting burned right now compared to a normal scenario. The charter rates, for the shipping lines are at all-time high, 3 times higher than what normal situation would demand. And many of these are also fixed for the next 3 to 5 years, right? So all these challenges put together, it's a very, very challenging environment, not only for the logistics company, but also for the customers. And as Mr. Rajkiran and Prahlad alluded to, the predictability around, how do you carry, what your cost picture would be, it's a nightmare right now, to say the least, for everybody.
Prahlad, Bhavik says it's an nightmare and really challenging. Now, one problem is, of empty shipping container. That's always been a challenge because, global trade has tended to be lopsided with China, a net exporter, for example, and US, the net importer. Is there a way out? And is making containers a way forward?
Thanks, Pran. I think couple of points, right? Just to get the context right on the question. One is container cargo historically has moved from east to west, right? Regular container cargo, and refrigerated cargo has moved from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. This is historically been the flow of trade, right? Having said that, I think it's also worth mentioning that the largest trade corridor in the world is actually intra-Asia, right? And it's not just in terms of absolute moves, it's a cargo that is moving within India. And not only is it the largest trade lane in the world as such, or the clustering of trade lanes, it also continues to be the fastest growing, right? Now, coming to your question from, I won't say China to the US, but from east to west, right? I think it's important to understand the structure of how this trade works. Just in terms of important content, the global container fleet, global container shipping fleet consists of approximately 7,000 vessels at this point in time. And we're talking about approximately 30 million TEUs, right, which are 20 equivalent units. And if you look at 2023 and you saw the total movement we saw across the leading ports in the world, it was approximately 400 TEUs. So I'm just talking about the total movement in and out, including double counts across multiple ports across the world, right? And if you see how this is split, I think what's interesting is the fact that China accounts for almost 225, right? So a little more than half of the total container activity anyway in the world. Half of it is accounted by China, and China continues to grow at about 5% in 2023, in spite of the economic challenges that they have experienced. If you look at the US port volume, it's approximately, I think, 40 or 45 million TEUs, right, for the top ports, the top 10 ports in the US. And if you look at Europe as a union, if you look at the EU as a union, we're looking at approximately 60 million TEUs, right? And I think just to give a relative comparison, India is at 20 million TEUs. So, we're, of course, essentially talking about a movement from China to the east, where China has 50% of the overall volume. I think, if you look at capacity, 2023 was a record year for capacity in terms of new vessels and new containers, right? It's estimated that about 350 new vessels were launched in 2023, and close to 2.2 or 2.3 million TEUs, right, were made available to the global container shipping capacity. I think the limited point here, and as Bhavik was saying, it's not so much about making more containers available. It's just that the synchronized flow of containers has been heavily disrupted, right? In fact, if anything, there's an overcapacity in the market, and we know this. The indicators are in place. I think the reasons why we're still seeing a crunch is because of this bunching, because of this, break in the global flow of containers, and that keeps coming back to bother the industry for the last 3-4 years. First because of the pandemic, now because of the Red Sea, and hopefully we'll see some resolution to this. But more containers is definitely not the solution.
Okay. More containers, not the solution. Raj, coming to the situation, probably black memories or the chaos and the skyrocketing rate charges, pandemic. It's not as bad as that. But what are the lessons that you picked up then, and how is that helping you now?
The customer expectation has changed 180 degrees in the sense of transparency, in terms of visibility, in terms of the entire metrics. That's changed dramatically the last 3 years. This is what we see. The expectations have really shot up. Uh, of course, we know due to the e-commerce and quick commerce, overall customers' expectations have shot up in terms of the delivery turnaround times, and we see that that also has improved. Previously we were talking of days. In today's context, we talk of hours in terms of any lane or any route you take. So these are some changes. The biggest learning is that what customers expect is that you cannot give an excuse anymore. So as a service provider to trying to service customers, you can't give excuse which you would have might be before the pandemic, because pure digitalization is all across the place. As I said, visibility is there. So you no longer can give an excuse, because we all have fought and survived the pandemic, which means customer expects that any hiccup in the entire supply chain, you are still able to manage that, and you're able to predict that, and you're able to do it at the least cost and give the high value. So I feel this kind of a ecosystem creation is the takeaway, that we all have been together collectively build an ecosystem which is able to survive in any environment, still service the client, and everything is as transparent as possible for the client to predict his game. I think that's what we said, that for him, trying to service his consumer or customer is the biggest challenge, and if we are able to sort of help that out, that's the biggest learning or the implementation post pandemic.
Bhavik, coming to you, the question that I have often toyed with you. An industry worth billions of dollars that moves 90% of trade is surprisingly still not resilient, if I can say. Why is it so tough, or are the challenges different? What are the problem areas for the shipping industry?
Yeah, so I think the question is quite relevant, but I feel on the contrary to the question, that if shipping industry was resilient, I think it was has shown resilience like never before. The way we see it, at least from the other side of the lens. I think we have learned many lessons from pandemic, and we keep going back to pandemic, and then what we've realized is that the disruption, unforeseen challenges now has become part and parcel of the shipping industry, right? So while we will have resolution in Red Sea, we don't know what's going to hit us next, right? So I think that's become at least the mindset, that you can't take a stable network and stable world for granted. We talk about the specific scenario which has resulted again in the disruption, right? When the Red Sea thing happened, and all the transits got halted, I think the solution was not only about circumventing and going via the Africa. The bigger challenge was not the longer transit. The challenge was, how do you get the capacity? Because if you just look at from, say, Asia or Shanghai into Rotterdam as an example, if you go via the Africa, the detour is almost 13,000 kilometers. And to manage that kind of a detour, and that means additional transit times of 2 to 3 weeks, right, would mean that you need that much additional capacity to be deployed in that sector if you want to run a weekly service, right? And that many containers, because the containers will also stay longer on the ship than they would ideally stay for. They will do many less round trips than they would otherwise do. And now when you consider all the services of all the carriers, all the shipping lines put together, you can imagine how much capacity was lost in this additional transit time for the global trade. And to infuse such a large amount of capacity into a fleet is not something that anybody can do overnight, right? And that has created the current challenge. At Maersk, and I'm sure at every other shipping company or logistics companies, we did that. At least we went back to the drawing board. We also revised the entire global network. We redesigned the network in the most efficient way. Does it solve all the problem? 100% not. But at least we allow the customers to overcome the challenges and allow us to operate without compromising on the reliability promise. If you ask me, resilience that the shipping sector has shown during this time, compared to the magnitude of problem faced, I think we have done quite well in trying to provide the best possible solutions to our customers. Not might be the ideal, but given the situation, the best. And we not only redesigned the ocean network, but also rolled out some alternative solutioning in terms of sea air product as an option. Hubbing in the ports, flexibility in terms of the cargo flow or the space that they need on the ships, deploying extra ships and extra loaders wherever we could find one, so on and so forth. So a lot of actions have been taken, but the scenario that we are in, it's a very, very difficult environment, and it's a very expensive proposition, very difficult proposition. It's just not the Lego blocks, right? It's the mega ships that needs to move around and need to be redeployed. So it does take its own time in that sense.
Fair enough, Bhavik. Prahlad, coming to you, Andy Darcy, the managing director and the group head of transportation at JP Morgan Asset, at the Possibility Shipping Week, said that thinking about shipping over the next 10 to 15 years, one could argue, despite the fact that we have these challenges, we are moving into the golden era, underpinned by difficult dark things. Do you agree that bad times are good for business, especially when it comes to supply chain and industry highly susceptible to disruption? It still lacks appropriate safety net.
Thanks, Pran. Interesting question and interesting point. If I understand, there are two separate questions there. One is, are bad times good for the supply chain business? And I think the other point is, why is an industry that is so susceptible to disruption has no real controls in place, right? In spite of being through the cycle repeatedly.
Yes. Yeah.
I think just looking at this independent responses, right? So first is bad good for the supply chain industry? I think one way to answer that question is just look at the financial performance of the supply chain industry, particularly shipping over the last few years. Definitely been good for them at a time when supply chains have been severely impacted. Now, I think the irony of the situation, and I think what is important to understand, is every industry is susceptible to demand and supply dynamics, right? And I think a great example is the air industry. As a passenger, if you book in advance, or if you you have a better rate. If it's peak season, you have a higher rate, for example. But I think what was particularly unique about shipping was that at a time when rates were sky high, overall performance was actually had gone through the floorboards, right? So shipping industry typically likes to operate at a scheduled reliability of, I'd say, at least 80% percentage points, right? During the pandemic, they were as low as 30%. At a time when obviously rates were through the roof, we are talking about multiples of base rates. Even today, if you look at shipping scheduled reliability, I think it's somewhere between 50 and 60%, right? So I think one of the major challenges and one of the major issues is that it's okay with demand and supply, because that has been the common narrative. But the reality is that the scheduled reliability and the general quality of service that's been offered by the supply chain industry has been a major challenge over the last few years, right? So yes, it's been good in terms of financial performance. It's been unfortunately not so good for the manufacturers and the recipients of this service over the last few years. As I mentioned previously, there are various reasons, and some may say some of these are out of control of the shipping or the supply chain industry. That brings us to the second question, if I understood it correctly, is that how come there are no safety nets, as I think you said, or essentially how come there is a complete lack of controls, right? And I think this recent crisis and the ongoing dilemma with the Red Sea indicates the limited governance in global shipping, right? Even at a time when the industry is fairly consolidated, right? Historically, the challenge with this industry was it was highly fragmented, but in the last 10, 15 years, we've seen significant consolidation. I think with the top 7-8 lines accounting for almost 70% of the total container capacity that is on the water, right? There remains a significant communication gap between peers and between the wider ecosystem, right? This includes shippers, customs, even various regulators in certain parts of the world, and all of them operate within their own Chinese walls, right? With their own unique systems and processes in place. So even external governance agencies, similar to the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, right, have frankly limited influence in charting a common path or providing a singular view of the industry, right? And their focus continues to be largely focused on seafarer safety, emissions, so on and so forth, which are also very important factors. But I think it's about time. Some would say that there's a system that is able to better govern, or at least there are a set of controls that at times of crisis allow better communication and coordination between the service providers, particularly in shipping. Thanks.
Interesting. Raj, coming to one thing that Indian exporters have repeatedly talked about, and it's the Chamber of Commerce, well, is that India needs its own shipping, right? Uh, what is your view on something like this, and does it merit a look?
Oh, absolutely. We do have our own shipping corporation of India, but the size and the scale is no match to the global players. If you see, if India has to become a hub, India needs its own shipping line so that it comes back to the base, and thus the cost also comes down. That's what it is. How do you create this network end of the day? The Indian subcontinent is a very critical piece, and if you link up Middle East, Prahlad was mentioning about Intra-Asia as a large trade route. So if that we have to leverage, we need to create our own shipping line. But can we do that now? It looks a bit late. Uh, but as they say, better late than never. Most important to get private enterprise to invest. So that's a very critical piece. How do you get somebody from India to invest and scale that up? So the answer is a clear yes. In our own way, TCI does run its coastal ships. We try to develop the coastal business. We are running 6 ships, 2 more ships on its way. We are running 10,000 containers on these ships. So the whole idea is how do you, of course, give a better proposition to customers, bring their costs down, reduce the emissions because now ships are going to be more efficient. So we are trying to do our bit, but again, Prahlad did touch upon the entire ecosystem of shippers, regulators, ports, all need to facilitate what I would call the coastal and inland water shipping. It's been a talk going on for 2 decades, I believe, but very little play in the ground. So end of the day, it's a hub and spoke of shipping we have to create. If Maersk is coming, Maersk is not going to serve the entire interland. It needs the feeders to fit in, and that's where people like us and the other shipping smaller players need to come into the system. I believe the answer is a big yes. We need our own shipping line, at least to cater to the Indian subcontinental the continent and the Middle East.
Okay. Bobby, coming to you, what is the disruption doing to your customers, and how are you helping them?
Yeah, so with this disruption, I think like if you see from an India perspective, right? I think India is gaining importance. It's clearly becoming one of a key player now. Also from a manufacturing perspective, again depends on how you see whether glass half full, half empty. Of course, we have a long way to go, but at least it's getting the attention, and we are seeing increasing activity within India. We're trying to get higher share of the GVCs and all of that, right? With lower tariffs, lower landed costs, and many incentives by the government and policies and all of that, it's becoming a solid option to diversify the global supply chain. India, with all these Red Sea, is no exceptions to the disruption. We are seeing increasing need, both capacity in terms of the ships or the that you need to deploy and the containers. I think you need to divide it into 2 parts. In a normal scenario, is India getting its fair share of capacity and equipment? The answer is yes. Do we have the capacity to carry the growth that India is seeing in the next 3 to 4 years with the deployment that has happened from all of us in the logistics company? The answer is yes. Is the right investments happening? The answer is yes. What has, of course, pulled us back a little bit, and we are no exceptions. Like what's happening in the world is, of course, the Red Sea and the capacity crunch that we discussed about, right? So what we are doing is that, as I said before, we are deploying extra loaders. We are also spending a lot of extra money to get the empty containers into India because the imports are not as strong as it's supposed to be. And if you look at pure data year on year, we have done 14% more positioning of empty boxes into India than what we did last year. We also have deployed as Maersk, 200,000 TEUs of additional capacity. Part of it helps cover the India market. Of course, more is needed, but not enough capacity is available in the market. All of the idle capacity, as I said before, is consumed in dealing with the Red Sea crisis. However, these are exceptional circumstances with massive or significant capacity constraints. And therefore, at times, you're also not able to fulfill all the allocation requirement that the customer has. What we are doing, of course, are prioritizing the transit sensitive cargo. We're providing the sea air options depending on the corridor where it makes sense. We're also giving them the hubbing solutions. We are looking at alternative solutions. We also ensure our existing service into Europe is extended into North Europe to avoid the transshipment delayed in the West Med that we have. So a lot of actions have been taken to ensure the cargo flow happens to as smoothly as we can. We minimize the disruption that the customers are facing. But are we solving 100% of the problem? Answer is not, because the scale of the problem is just way too big. But everybody is trying the level best to kind of provide the best solution in the circumstances that we have.
Right. The cost of IQ container, as of today, it's hovering around about, say, $6,000. This is well below the 2021 peak, but still considerably a lot higher. Where are prices heading in?
Thanks, Pran. I think the reality is that external disruptions are disguising the true state of trade dynamics, right? The reality is demand is soft, right? We're seeing a crisis in Europe where demand is kind of affecting. As I said, Europe is a big buyer as a union. There is surplus capacity. I mentioned that 2023 was a record year, right? We had 350 new vessels that hit the water and over 2 million TEUs. I think in normal course, rates should be close to pre-pandemic level, right? I mean, all things being normal. The reality is things are not normal. There are disruptions. There is no way to predict how long and how many other similar disruptions which are being caused either by geopolitical tensions or other aspects will pop up and impact the industry. But I think if you take a slightly longer view of how supply chains and related shipping costs work, all the fundamentals indicate that prices should stabilize and stay low for a fairly extended duration of period, right? Thanks.
Raj, coming to in the midst of all these disruptions, what is the role of technology? What are the opportunities here, and what are the constraints?
We did speak about it, and the fact that pandemic has accelerated the adoption, we are all aware. So I'm not going to touch that. One thing is for sure. Today we are seeing something like ULIP playing out big time in India. It's something which I believe is going to be a game changer in the coming 5 odd years. And when looking at technology, it's not just the information flow, but also adoption of greener assets. So when you look at the technology shift from ICE to EV to alternate fuels to something like LNG or a biodiesel, that's itself a change. The entire warehousing piece being running on renewable energy. Today, customers are asking, what is the amount of renewable energy you are using in your system? So that's something which is also very, very critical when you're looking at adoption of technology and the changes, what's happening. But there's also a myth that logistics is technology and technology is logistics. Sadly, that's not the case. This is one business where you ultimately have to deliver, whether we like it or not. The delivery is the most important aspect or the key metric in whatever you say. So somewhere a lot of companies got a little bit distracted, thinking that I'll have a technology piece, I would have got the delivery done, but that's not the truth. Technology is an enabler. Control towers are big thing or in vogue currently, where customers are saying that you put up control towers in our premises and we want to do an end-to-end piece, have visibility across. So these are the latest or new things in technology. And of course, AI, we all are talking, but really, if you see, it's going to take good 5 or 10 years for the impact to be felt. the cost to come down. It's not going to be immediate because it's always going to be a challenge between the vast workforce we have in logistics industry to the adoption of technology and how we find the right arbitrage. So we believe is a play of balance, play of arbitrage, which will be always you know working out as far as technology adoption is concerned. It's we always talk. If you look at everybody is serving global clients, and on the supply side you have people who are yet to come up on the technology piece, whereas your clients are there. Now, how do you bridge that? So, as service providers, that's the biggest challenge. How do you train a driver to adopt that technology to deliver that result to your customer? So I believe these are some of the challenges and opportunities we have, but you know, it's going to be a game changer in the next 5-10 years of people who adopt it well and implement.
Last questions to everyone, Bhavik. Let's get your views on where you see freight rates moving before the peak shipping season. And do you guys have enough ships and water to cater to the demand?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Wish we all had a crystal ball, in terms of to determine where the freight levels would be, right? Uh, and I wish we all could see the future. But I can see very unambiguously that our wish is to have of course the most important issue right now is a safe passage via the Suez. We all want that uh, Suez Canal to restart very soon, right? So that we return to normalcy. We don't know when that is going to happen, and therefore, until then, we continue to sail via the Cape of Good Hope and serving our customers best way possible. What we are witnessing right now is, as I said in my initial opening, is that the demand is really ramping up. Year on year, we are seeing a 9% growth on demand, and you can argue it's part of the demand genuinely going up. Part of it is also the panic buying, also expecting the freights to further go up, capacity to become even more tighter. We are already witnessing a lot of restocking happening for our peak seasons. A lot of our global retailers forecast for the next couple of months is quite strong, and all of this is also putting a lot of additional pressure on the network. However, our ambition, as I said, remains we continue to serve our customers in best possible way, make the capacity available in the best possible way, and try to protect the reliability as we can, in spite of all this challenging situation, which are very, very uncertain at this point of time. So, yeah, interesting times. Let's see how it moves in the next couple of months.
Interesting. Thanks for Bhavik. Prahlad, that with that perspective, the air freight and the air network seems to be largely insulated from buy-in swings that we see in supply chains. How do you see that sector doing? Air freight, air cargo. How do you see that panning out?
Thanks, Pran. I think there's clearly a spillover from what I was going through the IATA report from March 24, and I think there were a couple of very interesting trends that popped up there. Right, one is that global air cargo demand marked its fourth consecutive month of double-digit growth on a year-on-year basis. Right, in cargo ton kilometers. Right, at 10.3%. This was in Q1. Right. Obviously, that situation has continued now because it's even further intensified. And while air cargo grew at 10.3% during this period, it actually exceeded the height of Q1 2001, if you recall, when the lockdowns happened and air cargo suddenly became very popular. Right. At the same time, the total capacity, while the business or the demand has grown at 10.3%, total capacity grew by 7.3%, right? And this is essentially through belly hold cargo. So there's still a gap between the demand and the supply, which means that air cargo is also having a very strong run, and it will lead to a scenario where prices will kind of go up, right? And I think the only way to benchmark this is if you look at the year-on-year growth, how it's fared against overall trade and industry, it's been considerably higher, right? So I think air cargo will also benefit from a supply provider perspective because of these issues. It's just a cascading impact. We are seeing shipping lines which are taking much more time and costs going up significantly. As I said, schedule reliability is low. I think it's a great opportunity for here and the alternative to pop up. Thanks.
Right. Last question, Raj. Away from the Red Sea, everything that's happening across the world, is the challenge that you are facing when it comes to supply chain in India?
One thing is, on a lighter note, these challenges help us to keep our jobs. So that's the key part, that we as managers still, get these problems to solve. But on a serious note, I believe this is going to stay. There's no point in crying about it. We live in a world that these things will happen, and all these companies, all our company or Maersk, everybody have grown, and so are the consultants in demand because of this uncertainty. So that's a in thing. That's one. What I believe is that the customers will become more and more demanding. How do you service them is the biggest challenge. What the pivot, however, will be climate change. The pivot will be sustainability. The entire narrative will be, are your service offering sustainable? I just mark our words. The next 5-10 years, you're going to use that pivot to answer all other problems or find solutions. If any company in this industry is able to start working on this and find that answer, or at least work towards it, you will be able to face these uncertainties because they're going to stay. So this is what we believe, that the sustainability aspect will drive our businesses and might also have a lot of companies to close down, because it's not going to be easy to maneuver an entire organization, especially large organizations, to adopt sustainability across the value chain. These are a few things. And of course, the impact of technology. We have been speaking, it's across, that's something. So the two pillars to summarize is sustainability and technology, with a softer side on the human resource part. Thank you. Thank you, Brad.
Right. I think that's a good place to end this conversation. It's been a most fascinating one, especially in supply chains. It's always been interesting. Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Prahlad. Thank you, Bhavik, for being a part of this show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.